Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Like I said, for me, it's a learning experience. There's so much that you've given us in such a brief documentary. And one of the things I wanted to ask you was, how you came to create the Buffalo History Channel and how you see that work.
Well, the Buffalo History Channel basically came about during the pandemic. It really actually at the start of it. To go back further, I started off by doing a documentary back in 1997 on the history of the Build organization. And throughout my research, and I was able to come across a lot of information, and I also was able to go up to Canisius College. I was tipped off that there was a lot of film footage from some of the television stations. Incidentally, I was working at the TV stations, and that's pretty much where they had sent me. And I wound up finding a lot of information on Build as well as other aspects of the community. So after putting that together in the 90s, and I always looked around at all the material, kind of knew there were many stories. I knew then that there were many other stories to be told other than Build, but that being the late 90s and technology had not having advanced at that point, wasn't sure how I would do it. So I remember gathering a lot of material from there. And fast forward to how the Buffalo History Channel started. It was right at the beginning of the pandemic. I had just recently relocated to Maryland. And I did a screening up at Buffalo State University of another one of my pieces. And that was the last event right before the shutdown. So as I was driving back to Maryland, I happened to be home, I gathered up a lot of my material, a lot of my videos and everything. And since I knew I was probably not going to be doing much other than being at home and going to work, because I worked at the post office, I would spend a lot of time taking a lot of my work and uploading it to YouTube. And thinking of a name of it, I called it the Buffalo History Channel without really giving any real thought to it. Just something that I called it just to have a lot of my work there, and use it as a networking tool. So when I would meet people in DC or in Baltimore or anything, they want to see my work, I can just send them right there to my channel and they can just see my work. And after uploading a lot of my work, I noticed that I was getting a lot of attention. And so I figure I'll build on it. And I've always wanted to expand on telling a lot more Buffalo stories. And just took all the materials that I had, put it together, and just started churning out stories, learned how to use Zoom, and did some because everybody was pretty much inside, and everybody was pretty much doing Zoom and doing podcasting and everything. So that's pretty much how the Buffalo History Channel came about. And in the midst of that, in the fall of 2020, I did a story. I wanted to also chronicle the legacy of Jefferson Avenue and businesses on Jefferson. So I did a story on the Apollo as it existed when it was a movie theater. And after doing that, and then having the Moss brothers reach out to me and doing an interview with them, I started thinking to myself, I should do another one, because I did it in a line of original productions. And as it said up there, Buffalo History Channel original production. So I wanted to create something like that. And what's the next original production? Looking for a unique story, a story that hadn't really been told, something that you might have known about, but you never really heard it told, at least in this fashion. And the idea of FIGMOS came up. And, finally I got my own supermarket, praise the Lord. I remember hearing about it as a child, and and I remember, the biggest thing I remember is my grandparents used to shop there. And I would go there. I was about 9 or 10 years old when it opened, and I can remember going up and down those aisles and everything. So and I knew that it wasn't around very long. So I figured, that'd be an interesting story to tell. So when I came back to Buffalo on a visit, I went up to the library and did some research in the library. Went through some of the Challenger articles. I want to give a shout out to Alnisa Banks and Leah, because they had a lot of those articles housed at the library, and found a wealth of information. And one of the biggest things, when I was researching it, I discovered that there was a connection to the Tops market that was in the Town Gardens Plaza. And he was one of the overseers of the top of that Tops. I just thought to myself, wow, this is really, really interesting. This is a really strong connection here. And I read his story, and this is a good piece to do. So wound up doing it, and got a lot of attention online. Did another story on another smaller supermarket called the Dewdrop Supermarket later that year. Then fast forward, of course, into 2022, 5/14 happened. And after all that, not so much in the aftermath of the tragedy, but once there became a lot of talk about food deserts and the need for more black-owned supermarkets, that's when the FIGMOS piece began to get more attention. And also, I had some footage. There was some footage that I had shot back in 2003 when they had cut the ribbon for the Tops Market that got a lot of attention as well. So that's pretty much how a lot of traffic came to those supermarket stories on the Buffalo History Channel.
Yeah, it's amazing to me. I think obviously 514 brought a lot of raw conversations to our community. And one of the ways that I had put it, I said that I felt like it was, an acute tragedy, but that laid bare chronic problems, right? And so one of the things that I have felt really grateful for your scholarship and your documentaries is this storytelling that doesn't feel that it's been told as widely and as broadly. Again, you mentioned the Challenger, and Alnisa and Leah are great advocates for the Black community, but what the community lost in FIGMOS, it lost along Jefferson Avenue, right? And if we see FIGMOS closing in 1983 and not another ribbon cutting until 2003, right? We see a disinvestment that is pervasive in the city, and I think that some of that sort of structural racism that we see made its way into Julia's paintings as well, and it was one of those things that Julia and I didn't know about FIGMOS before your documentary, and I really, when I say that I think that these kind of cross-cultural exchanges are really important, I mean it, because without you making that choice, telling that story, especially in a city as segregated as Buffalo, sometimes those stories get sequestered.
They do.
And I feel that by you putting it online, telling Black stories is helpful to somebody like me, where I can go and I can hear those stories and see them and feel that there are additional ways for those stories to be told. For those of you who haven't been downstairs into the before and after, again, exhibition, it features 22 paintings by Julia, in addition to some prose by Tiffany Gaines and poetry by Jillian Hainsworth. But there are a couple paintings that featured information that Julia got from Doug. So maybe you can talk a little bit about how you met and how that work made its way into your compositions.
Well, Doug and I initially met on the Freedom Wall, if I remember correctly.
Really?
So
Yes.
way back, because
yes.
you came to do an interview for that. So, and I remembered, of course, just your research, and I hadn't seen this documentary, obviously, at the time, but I remembered that you were a great wealth of knowledge. So when I started working on this particular series, initially it was just going to be figurative work. So there was no intention of still life work. I got halfway through and I got angry. I was just really, really upset thinking about, again, just this idea of people coming into the space and looking at maybe beautiful portraits, but not thinking about the systemic issues and, the fact that there is food scarcity there, and there are all these problems that have led up to what happened. And so I felt like I needed to research and include some element that was more addressing that. And that's where the still lifes really came into place. But I am so incredibly grateful to Doug's research, because one thing I noticed was in the mainstream sort of media, I wasn't finding any sort of research on the history of Jefferson Avenue. And I came across your documentary on FIGMOS, and you were gracious enough to share like more resources with me. But I just thought that that was really important, and I was stunned, frankly, that like for all the news stations interviewing and talking about Jefferson, there wasn't this conversation about FIGMOS. And I think that that really matters, that we don't lose that history. To me, it's a scaffold, right? Like the achievement of having Black ownership and having this incredible thing that happened to the community, having that lost, like if the generation can see that, they can know it's attainable. I can reach for that, and I can do that as well. And I think we can't let that history be buried and disappear. So your research really gave me something to work with, and kind of like, I don't know, just inspired me to really think about those factors and to incorporate them in.
Oh, that's fantastic. I didn't know you guys met on the Freedom Wall.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
way
And
back.
I did a piece on it. It's on the Buffalo History Channel.
There we go. All right, I got to do more research.
And did
Learning something.
I think I got interviews with Julie. I don't think we had Chuck on there, but we did her, Julia and Idris, and we did a lot of coverage down there.
Yeah.
And John Baker.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting to me. Again, these stories I'm thankful to both of you that this is something that you want to share, right? I know, Tiffany's in the audience tonight, and she's working on, an exhibition, that'll feature Wilhelmina Godfrey, and she's working with, other artists in the region that are not currently represented in this collection. And so I think it's important for us to continue to tell those stories. And, because, I didn't know John Baker when I started the Freedom Wall Project, right? And now that relationship has become something very dear to me, and something that, every time I talk to John, I learn more and more about it. So, in addition to, FIGMOS and Build, are there stories that have resonated with you that you feel like we ought to, be sharing?
Wow, there's almost 300 stories on that channel.
Yeah, I know.
I have to remind myself of it. Many of them actually resonate with me. It's hard for me to pick just one. I think the one origin point of it I think the thing that resonates and is the closest to home for me on a personal level was Juneteenth.
Yeah.
That actually was the first initial Jefferson Avenue story that I actually told, and it was contained within the Build documentary series. Because it was when it started on Jefferson Avenue. My father was part of the original committee with Bill Gator and a host of other individuals. And when I researched it and when I spoke to a lot of the Build members, they told me that the actual intent of the festival was not so much to have a festival, but it was to encourage and bring back the spirit of Black entrepreneurship to Jefferson Avenue and restore it to the Black Wall Street status that it once at one time used to be.
Yeah. What is it? So again, I'm not from Buffalo originally. I consider this my home, truly, but I have a lot to learn about this space. And I feel, what is it that, I guess I don't know how to phrase it, like what is it that we've lost? Because when I look at those pictures of Mr. Goggins in 1981, that feels like a place I want to go. And it feels like it was obviously a place that was beloved. But there are these structural elements that show up in your work, And some of them, when you talk about getting mad, I mean, the having to fundraise to save the store, not just shopping there, but to fundraise for it.
One of the things that really stood out to me in researching a lot of these stories, particularly within putting the Buffalo History Channel together, there seemed to be a spirit, an energy within the community amongst people that were really, it seemed to be a real active time. Everybody was just into doing something, into doing whatever in the community. They were starting a business, having an organization, I can remember on the Buffalo History Channel, one example is interviewing about doing a story on the Black Dance Workshop, having Frances Hare and Gail Wells and Yvonne James Brown on, and just listening to those ladies. I remember I did that interview with them, and you do an interview and where you ask questions. That was one of the few interviews I didn't even have to ask any questions. I just sat there and just let them just go, and we went on for almost those ladies went on for 1 hour and 45 minutes.
Yeah.
And the three of them had my full attention.
Yep.
Of everything that they were doing. Then they sent me this wealth of materials. But I'm thinking I'm just doing a basic story on a dance group in Buffalo, and then to understand that that was the Center for Positive Thought over there on East Utica, and that they had that museum. That was the biggest thing that stood out to me, because we used to go there when I was a child. We used to go there for field trips and go through that Museum of African and African American art. So it was really an amazing and compelling story, and they had connections to Juneteenth. They had connections to the BUILD organization, and with connections with Rick James and all the things that were going on in the community. A lot of people were creating things, and a lot of people, and Gail told me this herself, a lot of people were working together.
Yep.
That's the one thing that they always emphasized to me. I think that part of it is one of the things that's missing.
Yeah. That's interesting. I think of Buffalo as a resilient city and a resilient community, but working together takes sometimes more work than you'd like it to these days.
It can.
And it's interesting though, when you mentioned Gail, Gail is somebody that I've worked with since the Freedom Wall, and that we'll be working with in conjunction with our Before and After Again exhibition. We're sponsoring some artists in the audience tonight who will be working, doing some plein air painting with the East Side Garden Walk. So I think it's interesting that what I appreciate about your storytelling and about your painting is that when I look at this, I can start to crack open that web. I can get the connectivity. If we start talking about FIGMOS, we can start talking about our current situation. If we start talking about Juneteenth, we can start talking about dance, right? There's a way for us to talk about the connectivity that we have through these cultural expressions, and I appreciate that the work that you both are doing are giving us a kind of different lens into those histories and those ways of storytelling. I don't know if you want to talk about a painting at all, but this was a painting that really moved me. It's a hard. There are two paintings that you put in the slides that are tough for me to look at. This is one of them, right? There's a sort of bitterness to the previous piece, but this one has a literal bitterness, right?
Yeah.
And it's just.
Well, I think for me with this piece, obviously was thinking about that idea of bitterness as a metaphor, and the loss of something, but also the idea of lemonade can be sweet if you try to make it. So I think so much of what we need in Buffalo is Black ownership, and I say that just frankly, nobody's going to love us like we love ourselves, and I think having ownership of things is really important. So when I reached this point in the documentary, it really made me think back to my childhood, and maybe you guys will remember some of these places. Miss Alice's Fish Market, I hung out there all the time, or Andre DeAndre's Hair Salon, and Shu Kelly's Karate School. So those places, it meant something to me. I mean, to know that there was Black ownership and that there's an investment directly into the community matters. And I think that systemically, we're stripped often of the opportunity to have that. So I think even when we have it on a small scale, or even when we have it briefly, it's so powerful. And I think I really felt that when I was making this one, just thinking about how many entrepreneurs have the spirit, they have the desire and the drive. And sometimes it's things like funding that makes it impossible, or sometimes it's things like redlining that makes it impossible to own the building that you want to work out of. So for me, that's really what I started thinking about with this particular piece.
So I feel like I've talked a lot about, so in every one of the still lives in the exhibition, you'll see, these kind of stark backgrounds that Julia has presented, but there's always a red thread or a red line talking about that historic systemic redlining that has caused so much strife in, many North American cities, but certainly Buffalo. And, you talking about Black ownership and Mr. Goggins being an example of that and empowerment, it strikes me suddenly as, one of the struggles that I have had as a public art producer on the East Side is Black ownership. I'm realizing, that people have asked me, like, can you do more on Jefferson Avenue? Can you do more in these places? And of course, we want to, we hope to. We're working to find those partnerships. But there are those moments where you go to a space or a location and it is not owned by a Black person. It is not owned locally. Yeah. Right? And so understanding the way in which those dominoes have fallen since the 80s or the way in which, I think that I am, as an advocate and as an activist, still learning so much about what it means when we say systemic racism, what it means when we say redlining, and how deep and pervasive those elements are. And I think it is interesting, the way that you've put your, that one little red thread in your work, but that it, to my mind, it represents something so big.
Yeah. Well, it's very much a background element too, and I think that's the way it functions here in Buffalo. We don't forget about it, but I think it kind of just melts into the background of normal and every day. It just kind of fades because we're so used to it collectively, I think.
I don't know if you have an answer to this, but I wonder how when I look at your work, especially about FIGMOS, but when I look at your work and I see these stories, I do feel like even though there's a distance between now and then, me and that location, that it is inspiring. It's a brief history, but I think that to me, it is something that, sort of as you said, it's proof of concept.
Yeah.
Right? We can have Black ownership in a Black city. Yeah. And we should, right? Absolutely. We should be demanding that.
Absolutely.
And I think that your work is helping to convince, a generation that maybe didn't have the opportunity to shop at a place like FIGMOS or to go to the Apollo in its first incarnations, right? To understand that these are not stories that are lost, but they're stories that frankly need to be revived, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So how do you see your work playing a role in our collective kind of education in that? How can we carry forth in the most responsible way your storytelling? Because I think I'm grateful that you're doing this on YouTube, right? I'm grateful that this is in a way that you can do it when you're not even in Buffalo right now, right? You can tell these Buffalo stories. For me, it's important because, I was speaking earlier with a gentleman in the audience about how, perhaps, Black audiences are picking up the Challenger, but maybe white audiences aren't. Maybe white audiences are in the AKG where you can pick up the Challenger. Maybe they're not picking it up. What are our roles as an institution to help tell you those stories?
I think the stories, whenever I'm asked that question, I just say the stories should serve as examples that, we don't want to romanticize the past, but you want to use the past as an example. A lot of times oftentimes we hear there's nothing going on in Buffalo. But when you look back, they're at a time when people were still leaving Buffalo, but you had more going on back then. So it showed you examples of how people worked and came together to many times make ways out of no way. Mm-hmm. And you had far less resources then than you have today. But people, I always say use the past as an example and to just build off of.
Yeah, that's inspiring. I think, I'm curious, Julie, I don't know that I've talked to you too deeply about this image, but this is a painting in the exhibition that really got me. I do encourage you, obviously, to go check out the work in person. Julia is an astounding painter. And when I look at this, I see it for what it is. It's a still life. To my mind, it is hilarious that Julia said that she wasn't certain she could paint still lives because she was a portrait painter. And I thought, well, if you can paint hands, you can paint loaf of bread. But
I learned something new about myself.
But this painting in particular, there's something about it, and I I don't know the word to use. The word that comes to mind is like, it's a little repulsive, right? The money, which to my mind, paper money, it has value because we project value on it and it is how we exchange for goods, but it feels dirty. I certainly wouldn't want to put money in my mouth, right? And so I think symbolically you can see it obviously as the filling that might go in a sandwich, but like here I see it literally. Like I feel like when I looked at it, I was like, oh man, the bread's ruined. Right? Like you ruined the bread. Like it's like, and you ruined it with like a lot of money. Like I don't carry, like I think maybe we talked about this, but like I don't carry 50s. Like I don't have 50s in my wallet, right? That's not, so like, I don't know. Talk to me a little bit about the choices that you made here, because it seems that, again, you're taking some of the documentary input that we're getting about these histories, and then you're making these really symbolic choices that allow us to kind of, like I said, kind of splinter out and see things differently, so.
Yeah. Well, I also don't carry 50s. I had to go to the bank for that. But it should be repulsive. I want it to make people look at it and like lose their appetite. This idea, because it is repulsive what it symbolizes, this idea of, all the power being held and who has the money locally. And, this idea of entrepreneurial spirit being crushed because of lack of funds, or just because of something. You may have the funds and you may not have the ability to get the store. It's so many factors, and I just think that disgusts me. And you see it permeate so many different aspects of Buffalo, whether it's real estate, education, ownership, all sorts of stuff. It's in everything, and I think that's part of the divide in Buffalo. It's not only racial; it's classist, extremely classist. So when I thought about this painting, it was that literal disgust that I had that I think is symbolized really well by the choice to make the money the filling in between the bread. And I think that on the note, I guess, of still lifes and just how I didn't think I could do it, I feel like I found a really powerful tool in doing still life pieces now, just based on the reaction people have had to it. I think it can say something maybe where, my portraiture, which I also love, can't necessarily say the same thing. So I liked that this could convey all of those really challenging and upsetting feelings that I was having where I couldn't do that with portraiture. So I'm glad to hear that it comes across as repulsive, but it should. It's good.
All right, it's doing the right work.
Yeah.
I'm gonna, it's interesting hearing Julia talk about where her work has been and where it's going, how it's been influenced by you. What are the next stories that we can expect from you? What needs to be told that you haven't quite queued up for us yet?
Right now, I've been like on a break for the last couple of months. I just told Tony from Channel 7, one thing I'm going to be working on is putting together something for Juneteenth's 50th anniversary, which is right around the corner.
Yeah.
So just trying to figure out looking for some new Juneteenth stories, particularly, be it from the past, be it from the 70s, 80s, 90s, so trying to find a way to try to bring all the eras together. And one of the interesting things that I've been observing that on Facebook, I posted a few different Facebook reels, which have gotten a lot of attention. One of them in particular was from 1980, which was the very first one that they had in Martin Luther King Park and along Fillmore Avenue. And we put some footage in there of a carnival that they had in the wading pool. And I'm looking at the comments section, it's a lot of people that never knew that there was a carnival there. And everybody saying, bring back the carnival, bring back the carnival for the kids. And I do know, because I was talking with Charlie Fisher, I ran into him yesterday, and I was telling him about it, and he was saying that Bill was having some conflicts with that because they didn't want the festival to belong to a carnival, just to a carnival. They were kind of opposed to the carnival, even though that they had it. And I forgot what there was a whole story with it. I got to find the tape and interview him again about it. Yeah. But I do remember when I interviewed him for Bill, there was a whole controversy with that carnival. So when I was reading those comments, I kind of was was laughing to myself about it, that it was, because a lot of people didn't know. And they just see that and they just want them to bring the carnival back.
Well, sure. I mean, the Juneteenth festival here in Buffalo is a site of great celebration and great joy. So please, for the people in the audience, and I know there are some who have some Juneteenth stories, tell this man, because
Yes, please.
because I want to see them, I want to learn from them. I want to continue this conversation. We have a kind of a humble group here, so rather than take questions from the stage, I'm going to thank our guests this evening, and I think we'll join you here if you have any further questions for us. I want to say a sincere thank you to Doug, to the work that you do. You were doing it because you felt like these stories needed to be told. They obviously impacted, another artist. They've impacted us. We've been able to then share that through the exhibition in a published book, point to the work online. I'm thrilled that Mr. Goggins was able to join us this evening.
Absolutely.